Welcome to First Bite, our Detroit Lions midweek podcast. Yeah, it's the offseason. We're still doing it. My name is Jeremy Reisman. I'm the editor-in-chief over at Pride of Detroit. You can find me at Detroit Online. With me, as always, co-hosting First Bite is Ryan Matthews at Ryan_POD, senior editor at Pride of Detroit. Ryan, how we doing?
We're doing good. Fresh off of parent-teacher conferences, coming hot into this discussion we're about to have with one of Detroit's best.
That's right. That's for sure. And let's just jump right into it. He's looking around trying to find Detroit's best. He's I don't. How long have you been at M Live? This is a horrible intro already. I'm already asking you a question.
Too long.
Too long. We'll just go with too long.
No, I was still at Grand Valley when I was answering phones at the Grand Rapids Press in 2007.
Okay.
So I guess 2007 in one capacity or another.
There you go. 15 years then over at M Live or M Live adjacent. The beat writer for the Detroit or on the Detroit Lions for MLive.com. Kyle Meinke is here. Kyle, how you doing, buddy?
Hey guys, Jeremy, it's day 3 of day 4 of the off season, and the Mustache is midseason form. I'm digging it.
Yeah, I have a couple obligations. I have to do a Ted Lasso cosplay during one of these streams. I also have to do, who's the other cosplay I have to do? I've already forgotten.
I don't know. There's so many people you play. Is it another Macho Man one?
No, I'm not doing another Macho Man one. Ned Flanders, that's right. Which will be a good one. And then I also have to dye it blue and silver at some point. So that's probably going to happen in the next month. But Kyle, let's turn it back on you because it's nice to kind of get an outsidery perspective in terms of fandom, I guess. You're more of you are a journalist. I don't know why I said more of a you're a journalist. You're not necessarily a fan, and we tend to get a little bit hype. And I'm interested in seeing some of your opinions on the Lions season. And I want to start right there because we asked a question to ourselves during the podcast last week, asking ourselves if the 2021 season was a success for the Detroit Lions, all things considered. Obviously, we're not talking Super Bowl, but going in with expectations as they were, would you consider the Detroit Lions 2021 season a success? I know that's a loaded question, but I'm curious as to what you think.
Yeah, unequivocally, actually. And I know it was a long season. I know 3 wins is not good enough. Brad Holmes said as much in the finale, and I'm not saying otherwise, but they were plain about their intentions coming into this season. Like, the season was not about winning games and making the playoffs. Like, their intentions were always to strip down the roster, reset the culture, and look forward to 2022. I think when you trade your best player, Matthew Stafford, and I know they got Melifonwu with the first pick, but really the returns on that was the 2 future first-round picks. Like, that to me telegraphs, like, it's not about 21, it's about 22 and beyond. And when I talked to Dan Campbell, I think it was like maybe 2 weeks after he was hired. I mean, he told me in a one-on-one, the same thing, and we've heard it in different versions throughout the year, but he told me in plain speak, like, every decision we make is about next year and the year after that. And I think we've seen that, right? Like, in free agency, I mean, when you go out there, it's every guy you sign is a bargain guy with a 1-year contract. I mean, you're clearly not gearing up for a, competitive pursuit in 21. So yeah, 3 wins is not good. And some of the losses were ugly and some of the losses were heartbreaking. Right. But it was never really about the wins and losses. It was about setting the culture, setting the foundation. And I think they did that. And I think when you look at how small the rookie class was by comparison and how many starters they were able to get out of it, starting 10 first-year guys at one point or another, all the way from Panay down to the undrafted guys like Jerry Jacobs and AJ Parker. I think they did what they set out to do, and I think they've really given themselves some momentum going forward.
Well, Kyle, you talk about that culture setting and what Dan Campbell is able to come in to do in his first season. But, the question I want to ask you is, like, what did you learn about Dan Campbell, maybe as a person and a coach, aside from, you just mentioned that it was all about, 2022, 2023, he's already looking forward to how he can build this team. What have you learned about Dan Campbell, again, as a human, as a coach, in your first year with him?
Well, the book on him, I think, has proven to be true. I mean, when he was hired, it was you couldn't throw a rock without hitting somebody around the NFL who would speak highly of the guy and how they would run through a wall for the guy or punch somebody for the guy or whatever it is. We've seen a version of those quotes throughout the league, guys who had him in New Orleans and Miami and so forth. And of course, we didn't know that firsthand going in, but it's borne out over the year, and guys like staff is just a 180 from where he was last year. And you can go from top to bottom of the roster of guys, not just saying they love Dan Campbell, but the way they fought all the way to the finish, and I don't have to belabor the point. We all saw the product down the stretch. It was much improved, even with nothing to play for, even with nobody out there. So I think that bodes well for the book on him. But if you're asking me what I learned about him that maybe I just didn't expect, like the play calling down the stretch was very good and very intriguing. And I know there's a lot of variables that went into the second half uptick, if you will, with the offense. Josh Reynolds coming to the fold as a vertical threat, Taylor Decker coming back, Ben Johnson designing more plays. I think, that was part of the infusion of the creativity that we saw down the stretch with a lot of guys, and in particular, Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I don't think we can dismiss the guy calling the shots. I mean, what he did was really hard. I was there for the first year of Jim Caldwell. I was there for the first year of Matt Patricia. And it's like, as a first-time coach, especially with Patricia, it was an overwhelming task for him. And I know he failed in a lot of ways, but I think he got underwater really fast with just not being able to handle all of the duties of a head coach. It's hard. And for Dan Campbell to be a first-time head coach of an 0-8 team and to then take over the play calling and all the challenges therein and really setting a new course for the offense. They didn't rip out the whole playbook, but they really changed the approach. They became more explosive downfield, more creativity, more trick plays and so forth. It surprised me because a lot of the things we heard about Dan Campbell was that he was a character coach. He was a player's coach. He was going to be a motivator, an inspirer. We didn't hear as much about the X's and O's, and it's a small sample size. There's a lot of variables going on, but I just think there's a lot to be encouraged about that I didn't know going in about, his handle on offensive schematics.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point there. I think most people, myself probably included, didn't really expect to see him kind of flex that muscle. And I think a lot of people were skeptical at the time when he took over play calling. It seemed like maybe a panic move because things weren't going out so well. And for him to really, succeed pretty much as you could realistically expect in year one while kind of juggling everything else, I think that's a really good point to make. My follow-up is what about Dan Campbell do you think you still have to learn? What don't you know about Dan Campbell yet? What do you need, I guess, maybe a bigger sample size before you draw any conclusions about him?
It's a great question. I think that, he wants to be aggressive, and we saw that bear out over time with the fourth downs and the fake punts and, everything. And I was going through, some end of the season housekeeping and in my notes, and I was going through my first interview with him, and he painted the picture for me. I didn't even remember the quote, but he was like, I want to be aggressive, and the school I'm from. And I kind of forgot about that. And it kind of bore out over time. I guess what I'm curious to see going into year two is what that looks like when they're competitive. Throw caution to the wind and to roll the dice. When there's nothing to play for, when you're behind. I mean, the first half of the season, they were behind damn near every minute of every game. So I don't know what that looks like. He clearly is an aggressive guy, and that's going to manifest itself some way going forward. But what that looks like, is he going to set another fourth down record next year? I don't really know, because if they're more competitive, if they're ahead in more games, a better roster, if they're playing for the playoffs, at what point does he pull back the reins on his aggressiveness and lay up, if you will? That's something we didn't really see this year because it was pedal to the metal pretty much all the way.
Yeah, no, that's a great thing for fans to keep an eye on moving forward because, like you said, there just weren't those opportunities. So, but you mentioned Kyle, you've been on the beat for Jim Caldwell, you've been on the beat for Matt Patricia. There were some bad teams over the course of both of those eras in Detroit. Is the optimism around Detroit unique considering? I mean, like you said at the top, I mean, it was a 3-win team. Have you ever seen this much optimism from fans after a bad season?
No. In a word, no.
Yeah.
And just a little plug here, at M Live, Ben Raven and I just started our own little podcast. We're like 6 or 7 episodes in, so we're nothing like you guys yet. We're still working on it, but we just did our episode this week, and Ben and I were talking about, like, I've been around the NFL for a decade now, and I've never seen a 3-win team inspire so much confidence or whatever the word is. I just think the vibes are good right now, and it's not just.
I was gonna say, do you think that's everywhere?
Sometimes.
Do you think that's more than just fans? Do you think that's just kind of like everywhere? Is that pervasive throughout the organization? Do you feel too?
Definitely. Yeah, the vibes are high. I think the vibes were high even before we saw the surge at the end of the year, but it's heartening when you see the evidence on the field. And Jeremy's been around this too. Like Jeremy, you can vouch for this. Like, there's just a different vibe around the building when you're coming off a win. Yeah. Like, you can talk nice, feel good. You can know, hey, we lost, but there's things to feel good about. But then there's no feeling in the NFL quite like winning, and winning 3 times down the stretch and doing it 3 times in 4 weeks in your last 4 games with Goff on the field, I think is really just added some credibility to the good vibes people were already feeling in Allen Park.
Yeah, it's weird because, I try to walk the line between fan and objectiveness as much as possible. And this is why I wanted to bring you on too, is because I'm starting to get swept up in it a little bit. I'm starting to get, optimistic and listen, Dan Campbell called me Negative Nancy or whatever a few weeks ago. And
Debbie
Downer, whatever. And I get, I get reputation on both sides of it, but I guess outside of just vibes, do you think there is a legitimate reason for Lions fans to be as excited as they presumably are? I mean, Dan Campbell has like a 98% approval rating on Pride of Detroit right now. Is it warranted to you? If you were a fan, would you be feeling that too right now, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, as a journalist who doesn't care if they win or lose, like I think there's reasons to feel optimistic about where they're heading. Mm-hmm. Like we said at the top, like, this year was not about winning and losing. Right. Of course, you'd rather win than lose, but that was not really the point of this year. The point of this year was to reset the culture, which was horrific at this time last year. I mean, the things that you have read are all true, and then it's then some. I have heard so much shit about Matt Patricia and the things that he did to that team and how people were feeling. And like I said on this week's podcast over at M Live, like, you just don't see when a coach is fired, like, you don't see players and people in the league and active in the league, especially, dancing on the grave. You just don't, because I'm a lot of reasons, right? Mostly because you want to get employment going forward. Right. And there was a stream of players and ex-players who were dancing on the graves of Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia before those bodies were cold, Yeah. I mean, it was all over Twitter and everywhere else. Ashawn Robinson, Darius Slay, Quandre Diggs, Stephen Tulloch was out there. I mean, Dan Orlovsky was out there, who Dan Orlovsky does not criticize anyone, and he was criticizing Richard on his way out the door. And now you compare that to where you are now, where it's not just that Campbell is well liked, it's that he has the command and the respect of the locker room. It's not just that he's a teddy bear out there. It's like these guys are playing for him to the very finish. And I tweeted this, and I don't want to make too much of it a little thing, because it is a little thing, but on the final drive against the Packers, and Jared Goff is out there, and Jared Goff doesn't have to be out there. He didn't play in the 2 previous games, and it's a lost season with 3 wins. No one think twice about that guy, shutting it down and looking forward to next year. And not only does he play in that game, but he's out there on the last series in the last minute, blocking on like one good knee, basically, for Amon-Ra St. Brown coming back around on a reverse. And that guy's a former first overall pick, 6th or 7th year in the league. Like, he's been to a Super Bowl, and he's out there for a 3-win team, blocking with like really one good knee. And it wasn't, I'm not trying to make too much out of it. It wasn't like a big block. You can go see it. It's like he kind of just like gets into what guy's way. But that to me, like that's a difference from last year where they were with Matt Patricia and how much guys they were totally done with Matt Patricia. And so that was what this year was about, was resetting that culture and trying to rebuild the organization and the infighting that had occurred during the previous regime and the walled off nature of the football operations with Bob Quinn. Like that was one of the things about the organization that a lot of people within the organization there was a lot of resentment and bad feelings and otherwise just bad vibes because they were walling themselves off from the rest of the organization. So all of that stuff was happening as well this year with the more open and collaborative nature of everything going on. And then you throw in 3 wins down the stretch and a lot of players playing better. And you throw in the good play of the rookies and some bargain free agents like Charles Harris who come in, Khalif Raymond who come in with no track record and play well. I just think it bodes well and gives a lot of credibility. I guess that's the word that I used before, but it gives credibility to what they're doing. And so I guess that's why I would feel optimistic about, where they're headed. Don't get me wrong, there's so many steps to make between here and the playoffs or God forbid, a title push. I mean, they have so many things they have to do. And no one can forecast if they can do it. A lot of things have to go right. But I haven't seen anything through 1 year that leads me to believe they can't do it. And that's different from the last regime. Like I was thinking that stuff in week 2 of the last regime. And now we're a year in and it's like they've given themselves a chance and they give themselves a lot of credibility going forward.
Jeremy, this isn't gimmick infringement. I don't want you to get upset. I don't want to step on your toes. Okay. But you asked Kyle about why is there a reason to be optimistic for Lions fans? Like, is that real? I have to ask about what's your biggest concern going forward for the Lions? You mentioned you can't really forecast a lot of those things. What are those things that we can't forecast that might end up being a detriment to Detroit's growth?
Well, personnel. I mean, it always comes down to players. Nobody can win without players, and the Lions don't have players. That's the reason they lost so many games this year, even with a lot of things going right. And that's what you can't forecast. They haven't added those players yet. Like, there's a lot to like about what they've done to this point, Ryan. With this rookie class coming in, and of course, Panay's a monster coming in. Like you could have predicted, hey, if X, Y, and Z happen, this guy's going to have a big year. But look at a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, and it's like a lot of teams could have had a shot at that guy, and they didn't. And the Lions chose him because he was a fit for the culture they want to build. Jerry Jacobs, like there's a million UDFAs out there, and they target a guy like Jerry Jacobs because he's a pit bull. That's the word that they use in Helen Park to describe that guy. And if you watch him play football, that's what he is. He's a pit bull. That's like he just goes after dudes. And so I think the thing that I like about what they're doing is that anybody can watch tape and say this guy is fast or this guy's big or this guy was talented or productive or whatever. It's not just about finding talent. It's about finding talent that fits what you want to do and fits your roster, and complements what you have on your roster. It fits the culture you want to build. And I guess that's what's enthused me or giving me confidence about where they're going, is because they didn't just draft some receiver who can go catch passes. They drafted a receiver because he's kind of a pit bull. Amon-Ra St. Brown, the way he blocks and the physicality. He goes out there on the first day of padded practice and he's picking a fight. And the third day, the 112th overall pick is picking a fight with the 3rd overall pick from the previous year. Like that's the attitude and the kind of like culture kind of thing they're trying to build. And they went out there and they found it. And the guy had success. And of course, even they couldn't have forecasted the success he had in the second half of the year. But that's the kind of stuff that happens when you're matching talent with what you want to do. But having said that, like you can't predict the steps going forward, and they need so much talent, especially defensively. And you love what Aaron Glenn did with making lemonade all year. But at some point, to beat teams, you need game breakers, you need playmakers, and you can't miss on those picks when you make them. And they're going to have the number 2 overall pick. They're probably going to have their choice of either Thibodeau or Hutchinson. I think we all assume it's going to be one of those 2 guys, and that's going to make a big difference. But you got to develop those guys like you have Panay, and they need a linebacker. They need a playmaking linebacker badly. For as good as Amon-Ra is and the good work they've done on that side of the ball, they need a playmaker on the perimeter. Like they have a nice player in St. Brown. DeAndre Swift is a borderline playmaker. Maybe he's a playmaker out of the backfield, but you need something like that vertically, and they don't have that right now. And before they get where they want to go, they need a player like that out there as well. So really, Ryan, it just comes down to personnel, and no one can predict the success or failure of what they'll do. But I do, like I said, I have credibility and confidence in what they've done to this point so far.
All right, we're gonna take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the guy in charge of all those personnel decisions. We're going to talk Brad Holmes, who just had his end-of-year press conference. Nice little segue into that segment. So we'll be right back here on First Bite. Stick with us. All right. Oh, I just realized my overlay is kind of messed up. If you're down, Kyle, I'd love to do a little Q&A with our live audience before we get into the second segment there.
Bring it on.
We don't want to take too much of your time here. We'll try to get you out here by 8. But if anyone in our live chat, we got 135 y'all. If you got any questions, feel free to throw them out there. And also, I have a bunch of thank yous to hand out for all the subscriptions. Derrick Boberick with 10 months of subscriptions. State Nate with 13 months. Primetime with gifted a sub to Riley Jane. Then we had Joshua Mercer drop 5 gifted subs. CJ Craig with another 5. Primetime. Primetime Man with 4 months subscription. Derrick Boberick with the 69 bits, of course. And then London Line dropped a 10 gifted sub bomb. Katie with the 400 bits. Black Pine, I think, is that. Thank you for the follow. Das Gibb with the 11-month subscription. And then Mrs. Ruby dropped by for a full year of subscribing. Says, I have to go pick up my kid from basketball. Please be aware that I'm lurking and that my birthday is a week from tomorrow. Noted. Okay, questions. Erwin, first, probably the most important question. What are you drinking?
A little ginger beer,
okay,
a little lemon, and some bourbon.
Love it. Is it that's not quite a mule, but it's mule adjacent.
It's mule adjacent, I would say. Yeah. So it was just to give a pro tip to everyone out there. My big drink of the summer was ginger beer, tequila, and lime. Give it a nice squeeze of lime, put it around the rim. That dude, it's refreshing. It's it makes you feel good, but it's not too much. And so this is my winter version of that, basically.
I was gonna say bourbon's got the winter warmth to it, right? So yeah,
exactly.
All right, what kind of draw are the Lions going to have in free agency? Asks Big Aries.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something I have been asking around about a little bit, and thinking a lot about. And there's a story I want to write, probably a column at some point about this, because I think it's interesting to consider, because obviously Matt Patricia wasn't a draw in free agency, and that's what happens when you lose, of course. And Detroit, being a mid-market team that's in the North, also doesn't have that stuff going for it. But it's not just that. I mean, if you pay a guy enough money or give him enough promise of playing time, you can sign anybody. But
right.
And that happened, right, with Trey Flowers. Trey Flowers was the number 1 free agent, or certainly right there in 2019. But the Lions had to give him $90 million to come here. And
then Justin Coleman that same offseason.
It's a great example, Ryan. I mean, number 1 paid slot corner, and
Justin, of all time. Yeah.
Justin Coleman was a solid player coming in. I know he didn't live up to expectations here, but in Seattle, he was solid. Yeah. But they had to give him number 1 all-time money at his position to come to Detroit. And you can go up and down the line. And that's what happens when you not only lose, and you lose in a place that's not really desirable for free agents, but you get a reputation for being an ass and being difficult to play for and hard on players and not taking care of players' bodies and beefing with players and having dumb rules and trying to embarrass your best players over social media posts. Matt Patricia really had a thing about Instagram. We had some off the record stuff. I can't really get into it because I respect that relationship, but even I've heard him complain about players in social media. It's it's 2021, or it was 2020. You got to get with the times a little bit. But that was Matt Patricia's thing. It was his way or no way, and he was difficult to play for, as we've belabored the point over years and years. But players talk, and so of course all of that stuff makes it more difficult for you to get players to come in. And that was one part of the whole Patricia Patriot way thing that I didn't really understand, because they were just being tough on guys and not fun to play for. And and they're in Detroit, which is like off the beaten track for where guys want to play typically as a city, you know, and then you're just not likable, and like you beef with your best players, and you send your best players packing because of personality differences. Like that stuff comes back around in free agency. I guess this is like my really, really verbose way of coming back around to Dan Campbell, because he's obviously the opposite, right? And we can't predict the future. And if they keep losing games, that's the ultimate death knell for wanting, for getting guys to want to come here. But the arrow is trending up in Detroit. And just like guys talk about bad dudes like Matt Patricia, like they talk about Dan Campbell, and he's getting a reputation as a guy who's not only likable and charismatic and authentic and lets players be who they are, like this authentic kind of thing that we've seen from Campbell, but even the way that he coaches, the aggressiveness, going for it on fourth downs, like listening to David Blau, like, hey, like this trick play had worked at Purdue, we should run it. And then they just go out there and run it against the Packers, like stuff like that appeals to players. Like they see that and they hear about it. And I do think like this year, you might see some uptick, especially as the Lions, have more money to spend. And this is like, as Brad Holmes said, this is the player acquisition phase going forward. But if they have success this year, if they're 500 or something like that, and they keep trending up, I think next year, with the way things are going and the reputation that Campbell already had and then firmed up, with the stuff that he did this year, I do think it's going to play out in free agency. You're going to see Detroit become a more desirable place.
It's interesting because you flash back all the way to what was it? It might have been, it was week 1 when we had the Aubrey Pleasant blow up on the sidelines, and I know some people were concerned at that point. Like players probably saw that and I imagine there were probably some players that are like, oh, I don't know if I want to play for that guy, but to see the narrative change in 4 months, and we probably knew, and like anyone who's in that locker room will sing Aubrey Pleasant's praises, and I think what people on the outside don't realize is that he treats each person differently, and I think he said that specifically too. Like Jeff Okudah is the kind of guy that responds to something like that, whereas he might respond differently to Oruwariye and might respond differently to Jerry Jacobs and things like that. But it's just kind of, it's interesting to kind of now have this culture here after what did, it was a bad look. Like I don't think there's any way around it. It was a bad look, but I don't think anyone that would, ask a Lions player about Aubrey Pleasant, I don't think anyone would say a single bad thing about him.
Yeah. I mean, there's 3 guys you hear the most about in a positive regard on this staff, and it's Dan Campbell, it's Aaron Glenn, and it's Aubrey Pleasant.
Right.
And he's a rock star, and they love him. And that's, when we talked to Aubrey, that was the thing that he said, was that I have credibility with these guys because I've been with these guys, coaching them the same way since day one. Like, and so I don't think Jeff Okudah or anybody else had an issue with what he did, but I think the thing that Aubrey Pleasant realized is that he wasn't doing himself any favors by coaching that way in the public eye either, when there's 1,000 cameras around to catch every little interaction on the sideline, and then social media blows everything up as it does.
Sure.
So I think Aubrey Pleasant learned a lesson there, that even if he didn't do anything wrong, and like the guys still love him for what he was, for what he was doing, for how he was leading and trying to make guys better. It doesn't mean it's right or the easy thing to do, because it caused distraction. Like it was a distraction that week. They had to deal with, the fires and to put out and so forth. So I don't think he lost anyone or any respect from anyone from that, but it was a mistake, like a tactical mistake, if you will.
Sure.
On his.
All right. I want to take one more before we jump back in here, and I'm never going to pass up an opportunity for you to talk about Justin. So we're going to do that. Dan
I knew it was coming.
Yeah, Dan asked, does Kyle like Justin's post-tree zoom haircut? I'm not sure what that entirely means, but Justin did have an interesting hair do this entire season. So, thoughts?
See, Justin and I get along really well. The thing that we beef on sometimes is he gets upset at me oversharing things about his life.
Oh, okay.
So there's something about his hair.
Off here if you don't want to.
There's something about his hair here that I would love to say, and I don't think it would be bad, but he might think otherwise. And so I think I'm just going to leave it at Justin makes interesting hair decisions for himself, and good for him to have the confidence to rock what he's rocking.
That's a very, you know what? I like it. I'll take that. When you used to rock a little bit of a mustache, now you're just kind of going the grizzled look. Is the mustache ever going to come back?
Probably. It's just
It's an off-season thing.
It's a function of my laziness, and I had it. I wore it actually for like almost a year straight. I would say, Jeremy. I never got as bushy as yours. It was never quite as manly as yours, but during COVID, I was messing around with it for like a year or so.
Yeah.
The first year of COVID, I guess. And since then, I've been keeping it closer cut in general. But today, it's just end of the season laziness, basically.
To me, the best thing about rocking the mustache these days is that no one in public sees it, so I don't scare any children because I'm wearing a mask all the time.
Yeah.
I just get to impress Deuce Staley, I guess.
I was just gonna say fans in Allen Park for sure. Deuce knows who you are. I think more than he knows who I am. So.
All right, let's get back into it. Thanks for the questions, everybody.
Those are great. Thank you.
And thanks for being a good sport there. Welcome back to First Bite, our midweek Detroit Lions podcast. We are here with Kyle Meinke of MLive.com. You can follow him at KMeinke, that's Meinke, on Twitter. Kyle, let's talk about Brad Holmes. Just had his post-season press conference. A real simple question at the top here. What was your biggest takeaway from that press conference? GMs tend to be a little close to the vest sometimes, but Brad Holmes said some interesting things. What was your biggest takeaway?
No big breaking news, right? First of all, I mean, there's nothing he said that was shocking. So I guess the most notable thing, I was curious about what his expectations were going into year two, because we all knew that year one was about the culture stuff, the foundational stuff that we've talked about, and wins or losses would be what they are. And so I think you can understand why they'd feel good about this year, even if they only had the 3 wins. But that bar changes next year. Like, you can only have that kind of feel good out of 3 wins for so long. The NFL is about winning. Eventually you have to do that. And so I was curious to hear what his expectations were going to be for next year. And I think they're closer than people realize. I really do. I'm not trying to
hype us up, Kyle. Crazy. Come on, hype us up.
Yeah, I'm not trying to sip the Kool-Aid.
Fan those flames, man. Fan those flames.
Yeah. No, I mean, they're the Detroit Lions, man. Buying into what they're doing is a fool's errand. You always end up looking the fool, and it's happened to me before. What year was it where they started off 3-1 or something, and they played the Chiefs? And that was 18 or 19. Yeah. It was early on in the Patricia stuff. Yeah. And I wrote a column, which is probably the worst thing that I've written, or at least the most misguided. But I was because they played the Chiefs obviously very competitively. They lost that game, but they played well. Stafford went toe-to-toe with Mahomes. Actually had a fourth quarter comeback drive, a go-ahead drive that, obviously they just came back the other way and did what they do, and the Lions did what they do. But I wrote after that game, hey, the Lions look legitimate. And I think they won one game the rest of the way, right? The entire rest of the season. So you have to buy in, at your own peril, basically. But having said all that, it's there's a lot to like about what they've done going into this second year, and but they have to get, as we talked about before, the player acquisition stuff. They have to get good players, and that's what Brad Holmes said on this week. This is the player acquisition phase, and I thought that was interesting because I do think there's an opportunity there this year. I think they're closer than people realize, which is what I was trying to say when I got off track. Goff's playing well. They need a field stretcher. They need a playmaker on the perimeter is what they really need. But you add that to a mix with St. Brown underneath, Hawkinson underneath. You got obviously Swift and Jamal Williams back in the backfield. A really good offensive line that didn't even play a single snap together last year. I do think the Lions are closer to a playoff push than people will realize, and maybe I'll get made fun of for saying that, but they're not that far off. And I say that in part because of what I just said, and also because they're going to have 7 games next year against teams with first-year coaches, right? I mean, Chicago and Minnesota not only are hiring new coaches, but GMs as well. They're going for their own rebuilds or versions of it. And that's all without the Aaron Rodgers stuff withstanding, So I don't know. I was curious to hear what Brad Holmes had to say about his expectations for next year. And he said that it was about player acquisition. It sounds like they're going to, in addition to all the stuff they have going on in the draft, but they're going to be opening up the billfold a little bit in free agency, which is a side of Holmes we haven't seen yet. It was all the one-year contracts really last year. So I thought that was the most interesting thing that he had to say. I do think that you're going to see a much more active team when it comes to free agency this year.
Yeah, and speaking of Brad Holmes, I mean, obviously his biggest transaction he's made was the first one he made, trading Matthew Stafford away for Jared Goff. You wrote an article earlier this week titled "The Lions Have Some Huge Decisions to Make at Quarterback, but Jared Goff's ascent helps buy them some time." Brad Holmes said some things about Jared Goff in his press conference. What do you think? Do you think Jared Goff did enough to stave off drafting a quarterback in this draft?
No. I do think he did enough this year to buy the Lions some time if it comes to that, which it might, because I think when they had their original quarterback plan, their original plan going into this year after the Stafford stuff, it was to build out the roster enough so they could support a franchise quarterback when one came down, either in this draft or the next. And because of the Stafford trade, they would have 4 first-round picks. It's a lot of capital to either draft a guy that you like, make a move up the board one of those years to go after a guy you like. But obviously the quarterback class this year is not what people were anticipating. There's no one, I think, really for the top 10, certainly for the top 5. And if you look at the scouting profiles, I'm definitely not some draft expert or whatever, but if you watch these guys play, if you read what, draft experts have to say about these guys, at least to this point, a lot of these guys project as solid NFL starters. That's kind of their ceiling. And that's kind of what Jared Goff is, right? Is they already have their solid NFL starter. And I don't know if burning a first round pick on a guy whose ceiling is maybe something akin to Jared Goff is really the way to go. The good news is I do think with Goff playing as well as he did down the stretch, and doing so with Dan Campbell as the play caller and Ben Johnson, designing plays, these guys who are going to be back next year, it buys them some time so that they don't have to draft a guy. They don't have to press that quarterback issue this year if they don't want to. And they might not want to. They do have 3 picks in the top 34. They'll have an extra 3rd round or 2 because of the comp pick stuff. So they have the ammo to do it if they want. And they'll have a good look at some of those guys, by the way, at the Senior Bowl. Malik Willis is on their team. Sam Howell's on their team down there in Mobile. So they'll have a good, intimate, hands-on look at some of these guys, which I think will help the evaluation. But if they don't like them, if they don't see what they want to see in a franchise guy, I say they should pass. And they have that luxury too, because Goff played well enough to, I think, get you through next year. And I think there's a path to them, being competitive with Jared Goff out there, as I said before, because I think if you go out there, if you don't like the quarterbacks in this draft, for example, you can go out there and you can go into free agency. And there's a lot of top flight kind of wide receivers out there. You can buy a guy in free agency. You've also got the 3 picks in the top 34. That's a lot of ammunition to go find another receiver, including the 2 in the first round, to go find a guy. And so I think if you were to want to roll the dice this year with Jared Goff, you could surround him with more weapons that would make him more capable, I think, of leading this thing forward and then buying yourself some time to the quarterback class in 2022 or 2023 rather.
I'm still getting the years mixed up too. It's January. You're allowed to.
It's been a long 5 months.
It has. I want to talk a little bit about his first draft class, Brad Holmes' first draft class. He kind of gave himself a little pat on the back during the press conference, saying, all 6 of them got some playing time, 5 of them started, or whatever the stat was. But for all the praise that we're giving Penei Sewell and Amon-Ra and even Ali McNeil, there are two pretty big question marks with Derrick Barnes and Levionezurike, and Holmes seemed pretty optimistic about those guys and provided some, I think, important context. Levi opted out, was dealing with an injury in off season. And then with Barnes new to the position. My question to you is, how much are you buying those excuses and what level of concern should Lions fans have about those guys? Obviously no one's calling them a bust after 1 year or anything like that, but do you think it was fair for maybe Lions fans to expect more out of those guys this year?
Barnes was a 4th rounder, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So Barnes, he kind of was what you expect from most 4th rounders that are not named Amon-Ra St. Brown. 4th rounders, they're kind of a roll of the dice. You expect maybe contributions, especially on special teams at some point, but like whether they become full-time starters on offense or defense is really like probably less than 50-50.
Yeah.
So for him to not be a major factor is not really a concern or even out of the norm for a guy that was drafted where he was. And as Brad Holmes mentioned this week, he's a little light on experience as well with the position that he's playing now. So there's no real concern. I think that, there was like some it was interesting to see the hype kind of build around Derrick Barnes and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like it was kind
hype,
of
for sure.
He did he became something of a fan favorite. I noticed that with like just the stories and how they got clicked and like on Twitter and stuff, like what people were talking about. I'm like, man, like 4th round linebacker, like it's getting a lot of love. But like, so there's no concern, and that's a tough position, and there wasn't a lot of talent around him. I don't know what he forecasts as. I don't know if he'll ever be a 3-down guy, but as a 4th round pick, like there's no reason he can't contribute in future years if he continues to develop. The bigger concern is with Untitled in the 2nd round. I know the spin with Holmes was about the injury in training camp, which is a real thing. And when your 2nd round pick as a 21-year-old or so is going to back specialists in his first training camp, like that's never really a good sign, I would say.
Right.
But he also didn't do anything when he was out there, and he's probably slightly better down the stretch, which you would expect, but I still didn't really see a guy who looked like a 2nd round pick out there. Right. So who knows? Like maybe he gets healthy this offseason and makes some leap. I know that Todd Wash, the defensive line coach late in the year, was talking about how he's really got to improve his lower body strength, which will not only help his like conditioning and his health, but will, obviously just help him at the point of attack, because that was a struggle for him this year. So that's where my concern is, Jeremy. And of all of the draft stuff, like I think Holmes did a lot of good things, but him talking about how he loved Levionezurike so much that he was thinking about trading back into the 1st round for that guy, and then they still get him in the 2nd round, but he looked like he did, like that to me is the concern in the class. And no GM hits at 100%, but certainly that's the strike in the first class.
Yeah. And Kyle, you talked a little earlier about Brad Holmes, what he'll be able to do in free agency. This is the talent acquisition phase, a little bit more money to spend this offseason. Who's the top guy in-house right now that you think the Lions need to bring back for next season? Because there's quite a few candidates, right? like Charles Harris has a breakout season. Tracy Walker seems like he's the leader of that secondary. There's plenty of guys to choose from, but like Josh Reynolds, the emergence of Jared Goff once he comes to town. Alex Anzalone, just from the standpoint that the Lions don't have linebacker depth. We just talked about Derrick Barnes. So like, who do you think is really important in-house right now that the Lions need to bring back for next season?
I think one thing that I like to think about in this conversation, which I've given a lot of thought in the past couple of weeks, is, year one of a total rebuild, your expectations are in one place. When you go into year 2, your expectations are in a different place. And when those expectations go up, players who might function well in the first year of a rebuild might not fit going into the 2nd year. And I think Anzalone is a good example of what I'm saying, where he was
a good point.
A very good team leader who came in with experience in New Orleans. He knew this defense. That's a big reason why they brought him in here, because there was going to be substantial turnover at every position. Obviously, there was no depth at linebacker, but you're installing a new system for a new coaching staff with substantial turnover all over the place. They valued having a guy in the middle, a leader and a guy they could bank on off the field, who would be able to help a lot of guys learn this scheme and lean on and so forth. So Anzalone, what they brought him in for was a very good fit. But if you're serious about winning games going forward, like you need a better player than that. And I don't mean that in any kind of way other than like he is what he is. He's a limited player who, is a great team leader. He was a plus for this team this year. But if you're serious about winning games next year, or certainly in year 2, like you're going to need a different player than Anzalone. So for him, like I wouldn't bring him back, or if you did, it would be like another 1-year kind of deal, right, where it gives you the flexibility going forward. To me, the priorities would be Tracy Walker and Charles Harris. And I think both would fit this paradigm that we're talking about, where year 2 is greater expectations, and certainly in year 3, where you're going to be making a push. And I think both those guys would fit into that. I know that the lack of track record with Charles Harris is a little bit of a deterrent. It's just, he was a 4-year bust basically who came in and had a great year. So I don't think I'd give him $100 million. And maybe he'll find that like money is crazy for pass rushers in free agency. And if he finds this someplace else, Godspeed and God bless. Like, he is a good fit for what they're trying to do, right? Like, he's a schematic fit, he's a locker room fit, and I would bring him back and pair him with Hutchinson or a Thibodeau, right? And you got Julian Okwara, who to me was like one of the 5 or 10 most improved players from week 1 to week 18. Mm-hmm. Like, he looked like a totally different guy by the end of the year. You got something going on at pass rusher, and that's an important position where the Lions have not had enough talent in a long time. And of course, Romeo Okwara as well, of course. Walker is, similar deal. Like, he I think he has more track record. That's why I'd be more confident in re-upping with him, like with a multi-year deal. And it's not just the play on the field. Like, he's a above average player, not an elite player, but he's an above average guy you can depend on. He's pretty dependable, and off the field too. Like, he's a guy who cares a lot about winning and about the locker room and about his teammates, about doing things the right way. I like, people think real highly of that guy. And I would definitely make him a priority as well in free agency.
All right, Kyle, we're going to close things up there. I want to thank you for joining us. And last question is, where can the people find you? And I know you want, I want you to talk about your new podcast too, because obviously if people are listening to this, they like podcasts, and you guys are doing something pretty unique over there at MLive. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Jeremy. You can find me all over the internet. Too much. Way too busy these days. But no, at mlive.com/line, especially as the draft stuff kicks into full gear here going forward. I'll be down in Mobile, so I'll have a lot of Senior Bowl stuff, and that'll be a big week with the Lions down there and the draft prospects who are down there. And then, yeah, you mentioned the podcast. It's a new venture from us. I think we just dropped our 7th episode today, which is kind of a rehash of the Brad Holmes press conference. And we, got a bunch of the best sound bites and kind of, just chopped it up about some of the most important stuff that he had said. Going forward, we have a little bit different vision for it than what we've done so far. We're going to lean heavily on guests, hopefully. And once we get more into the season stuff, it'll be player guests. Up until then, I got some fun ideas, I think, for some different episodes. I want to do like a food episode, just about like tailgating and stuff like that. And I don't want to spill the beans on what we're doing next week, but I have a couple of guests lined up that I think should be a lot of fun. One of whom was mentioned on today's Part of Detroit podcast. Just wink, wink. I can't spill the beans. I don't want to. I don't know if it's okay to say it. Yeah, no doubt. I'll just say we talked about this guy's hair, so we'll leave it at that.
Oh, there you go. that may have been during the break. So those of you listening on the audio form don't know what we're talking about. But it's a Dungeon of Doom podcast with you and Ben Raven. If I would recommend going and listening to past episodes. Charles Harris had a really great episode with him. Spoke a lot about potentially coming back. Graham Glasgow, who's a friend of ours, always very entertaining to talk to. So I'm
that
sure.
Guy's a riot.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah.
That was probably my favorite episode to record, just because him and I have a good relationship. Yeah. And I told him after we had shot it via Zoom and then it finished, and I'm like, yo, I think it was our second episode, if I remember right. I think we did Dan Miller first, and then Graham second, because we have a good relationship and he's awesome. So I knew that he'd be a good way to start a new venture off like that. And we get to the end and it cuts off. I'm like, Graham, I think you've already given our producer a carpal tunnel just with like the bleep button, because he got a little comfortable. I know he's sitting at home. He's got an ankle injury he's rehabbing from, So like I could tell he's a little free and easy with the language, if you know what I'm saying.
Yep. Absolutely.
It was fun to record though. And so it'll be about a weekly podcast going forward. Dungeon of Doom, obviously it's a reference to the Jim Caldwell era, just having a little fun with Jim, but yeah, it's fun. It's good times.
All right, Kyle, appreciate you joining us. As always, love just catching up, even though it's only been a few days since we've seen each other.
Yeah, good to see you again. And Ryan, I think this is the first time we've met in real life, sort of. I guess. I guess Zoom life. So it was nice. It was nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
All right, thank you for listening, everybody. We'll be back with a full podcast either on Sunday night or Monday night. We might move to Monday nights now that the season's over. But until then, thanks for listening. It's Chaos. Be kind.